Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, Tackles and Tinnies listeners. This is very odd. It's your boy Gary, recording podcast by himself, but I'm doing Physio Corner and breaking down Jerome Hughes' injury. For those who haven't met or who are new to this show, my name's Gary. I am a sports and musculoskeletal physiotherapist, and I work at Burley in Back in Motion. Today we're going to break down, I think most of you would have heard Jerome Hughes injured his left shoulder. He sustained a shoulder dislocation about 2 weeks ago. So yeah, we're just going to break down a little bit about the mechanism of action, kind of what's involved, what's the rehab and the return to play strategy. So what happened? So a bit of a summary, and I'm going to pull up a play-by-play at the moment and just kind of describe for those that are listening what happened. But it was the Roosters versus Melbourne Storm, and Jahrome Hughes, he was going for a tackle. He missed James Tedesco as he kind of Jimmy the Jet just ran through, but going for a tackle, his left arm landed really awkwardly. So it's oftentimes that mechanism, that full outstretched hand and landing on it. And for Jerome, I don't think he's previously had, I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think he's previously had this left shoulder injury. So just the force of that typically can cause an anterior shoulder dislocation. And I believe that's what Jerome Hughes sustained. So an anterior dislocation, for those who are interested or not aware, is the most common type of shoulder dislocation. So it's where the upper head of the arm bone, so your humerus, it's displaced forward. So it usually goes forward out of the shoulder socket. Oftentimes I wouldn't say super common in rugby, but more of that traumatic event. So like sustaining something like what Jerome Hughes did. Oftentimes footy players you might see them going for a try or trying to score, and they've just had their arms outstretched, and then someone's may have just gone over the back. It's quite sore. Very intense pain. You can see that the shoulder socket's usually out. And yeah, very limited mobility and swelling. So usually, like Jerome just didn't really want to move his arm. He just left it kind of in that neutral position. But yeah, interestingly, I have sustained one on my right shoulder. That was not a fun time, but as a physio, I think it was interesting to rehab my own shoulder. So yeah. Covering the mechanism of injury. So yeah, being forced into that. So physio speak, but abduction, so bringing your arm out and then into that external rotation, oftentimes is the most, I guess, your arms and your shoulder is the least strong in that position. A bit of a review in terms of anatomy. Usually that glenohumeral joint, it's very mobile, so you can move through full range of motion, but it's not very stable. In terms of the most stable joint in there, it's the hip is much more mobile and stable hip compared to the shoulder. But some key structures, getting into anatomy, but it might be the anterior capsule, it could be the labrum in the shoulder that could be injured, and possibly any rotator cuff strains or tears is quite common. He would have got an x-ray to clear any like Hill-Sachs lesions or any bony lesions to the shoulder. Let's dive into a little bit of a clinical insight, and then grading the injury. So there's a thing like between first time and recurrent dislocations. Oftentimes, if you're younger, let's say between 18 to I think 25, 26, if it's your first time, the risk of re-injury is elevated. It's higher, especially because studies found that during those that age category is the time where most kids or most people are playing sports like rugby. So that can just increase your risk even higher. So once you've had a shoulder dislocation, the injury risk of redoing it, because you're cleared to play again, and then get into that position again and then re-injure. So yeah, higher risk in young, high impact athletes. What we look for in the clinical assessment, typically the physio on field would have assessed Jerome's passive range. So looking at lifting his arm, how far can he lift it, any apprehension tests. So it would be quite difficult as Jerome would be moving into that position. He wouldn't want to go any further. But he got X-rays and MRIs. And I mentioned it before, but ruling out any bony bankart, so any lesions to the bone, any slap tears, so slap tear being a bicep anchored to the shoulder, any kind of cartilage can be pulled from that shoulder. And then any like rotator cuff involvement, so having a look at the muscles and any tears. So in terms of grading, you've got grade 1, 2, and 3. So grade 1's a subluxation. So typically a subluxation would be a very quick, in and out kind of action. Not much is injured. So your structures are all pretty good. A grade 2 is a dislocation, but without significant tissue damage. Grade 3 is a dislocation with soft tissue or bony lesion. Some similar case studies. Let's have a look briefly. But Kalen Ponga in 2021 had multiple dislocations. He eventually opted for surgery, and I believe it was the end of the year. He got his shoulder stabilized. Oftentimes with rehab, if it's the first time, most medical professionals would like to try conservative rehab. You want to manage it with conservatively rather than going straight to surgery. And I believe that's what Kalen Ponga did. Went conservative first and then, correct me if I'm wrong, but may have had multiple dislocations and then got the surgical stabilization. Cameron Munster in 2022 was another one. He played through minor dislocations during the final series and then had a bit of shoulder taping, that conservative management, so focusing on his rehab, getting that rotator cuff nice and strong, building the strength back. Cooper Cronk in 2018 fractured his scapula and had a bit of shoulder instability, so he managed it quite conservatively, which is great. And then most recently, I remember Ola Kawatu from the Manly Sea Eagles. He suffered, and last week actually re-aggravated his shoulder, so it popped out again. So most likely for Ola Kawatu, he's going to go under the knife and get shoulder stabilization. But just some key learnings, I guess, just to reiterate, like conservative management is often attempted first. So you want to manage that. If you're in a position or if you knew someone that was in a position where they had a shoulder dislocation, likely, ask them to see a physio, which is the first port of call, and then attempt conservative management. Physio will go through a range of assessments looking at the passive range of motion, active range of motion, things like pain levels, and then begin a home exercise and strengthening program. If the person is young, in their late, teens or early 20s, there is a high reoccurrence rate of re-injury, typically because young kids want to return back to sport quite quickly, and then you return back to, let's say, rugby league, and then it's high contact, high impact. You sustain another blow or get into that aggravating position, and then there's a high recurrence rate. In that case, surgery is likely recommended, but oftentimes I would see your physio first. So going into rehab principles. So Jerome Hughes, what's his return to play timeline? So initially, this is more textbook, but that 4 to 6 weeks. Typically, I personally would err between that 5-6 weeks and just to monitor before the return of play. But acute management, so being in that neutral position, Jerome Hughes, for those that are listening, but arms close by to your belly at that 90 degrees. That's the most comfortable position. And it's oftentimes early immobilization. So being in a sling. Now, oftentimes they say about 2 to 3 weeks. So when I was at hospital, that's what the doctor said. But I started moving it a bit more. I took the sling off after a week. because I just wanted to move it as much as I could. So early range of motion. It also depends on the type of injury. So we talked about the grades before. If it was a grade 1, 2, or 3, if it was grade 3, you'd probably want to immobilize it a little bit longer. But yeah, for Jerome, I'm not sure what his scan says, but I'm pretty sure he's going for the conservative management. So likely that early immobilization, early ROM to get his shoulder motion back, and then some modalities. So TENS machines, if anyone's heard of TENS machines, you attach some electrodes to your muscles, and then it kind of contracts that muscle and contract and relax, which can provide a bit of an analgesic effect. Phase 2 is often post 2 to 3 weeks, or you're looking around 2 to 3 weeks, mobility and strengthening. So the pain and range of motion should be a lot better by 2 to 3 weeks. So then from there, you're focusing on isometrics or moving through range against resistance. So rotator cuff strengthening, elbow and across, doing those types of exercises with bands or cables. And then a bit of closed chain kinetic exercises. Phase 3, you're looking at more past that, 3-4 weeks, but sport specific conditioning. Jerome Hughes, using him as a case, but would be going back to passing and kind of tackling with a lot of strapping. And then they'd be strapping the hell out of his shoulder and then probably putting him in a bit of a brace at training. But yeah, some expected return to play. I know a lot of people like to know these weeks. So if conservative, if it was that mild dislocation, it'd be about 3 to 4 weeks. If it was more moderate, so labral irritation, you're looking at more 4 to 6 weeks. If you were to get shoulder reconstruction or shoulder stabilization, you're looking at more that 4 to 6 months. And I think Jahrome Hughes, it was more of a mild dislocation. It could be wrong, but more of a mild dislocation. So they're looking more at the 4-week mark. They're going to try and get him ready for the finals, which is great, because Melbourne Storm, such a great team. They'll be hopefully, or definitely in the finals. So you'll see Jahrome Hughes pop up there, which is fantastic. So what are we thinking in terms of risk of recurrence and long-term outlook? So up to 90% of recurrence rates in young contact athletes without surgery. So it's not great in terms of re-injury. Jerome being probably in his later 20s, early 30s, the risk of re-injury is oftentimes lower. I think there was a study past the age of 30. If you were to have or return to contact, it's oftentimes less reoccurrent rate for those that are past 30. So that's good news for Jerome. But it's oftentimes a return to sports. The decision making is based on the team. So especially in elite athletes in elite sport. So the team doctor is going to weigh in, looking at the final schedules. It's going to depend on Jerome's pain tolerance and the demands of the position. So Tyrone Wishart is playing there at the moment, covering number 7. He's a great player too. Is he as good as Jahrome Hughes? I don't think so, but as the position demands. Also, some decision making. The medical staff, the physios, will be thinking about the position-specific risk. So halfbacks, they're having to tackle heaps and then passing left and right. It is a bit more of posing like a bit more risky for shoulders in terms of that instability. But that's a wrap on our deep dive into Jerome Hughes' shoulder dislocation. But these injuries are quite common in rugby league, but every athlete's rehab journey is unique and slightly different. They're influenced by position, timing, the team needs, and individual tissue response. I'll definitely be keeping a keen eye with Hughes' progress. It will be good to check in, and we might check in a week or two, whether he opts for surgery or whether that team decides, medical staff decide shoulder stabilization or proceed with more of that conservative rehab. That'll be an interesting point. And then, a bit of outro, but if you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe. So click that subscribe button, share with your physio networks or with your mates if you found this interesting, and then just check in on previous episodes. I know Ryan's been doing really great stuff with Chris and Adam and Jakey with all the podcasts analyzing the SuperCoach stuff. It's probably beyond my scope and expertise because those boys are weapons at it. But if you're more interested in these types of physio breakdowns, looking at injuries, let us know. Put it in a comment as well. It gives a lot of fan engagement, and really appreciate your support. But that is all done. We'll see you at the next one.